He's not trying to do what everybody else is trying to do, which is have a hit and then keep pulling that handle. He doesn't care about that. He doesn't.
For decades, fans looked at Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young and saw legendary harmonies, stadium rooftops raised by four voices, and music that defined an entire generation.
We spent a lot of time together over the years. We've done things with each other that have...
What they didn't see, at least not clearly, was the war behind the curtain. The egos, the insults, the grudges that outlived friendships, marriages, entire eras. And at the center of one of the most bitter feuds in classic rock history sat two men who could never seem to meet in the middle, no matter how much magic they created together. David Crosby and Neil Young were musical brothers until they became sworn enemies. And in his final years, Crosby stopped sugarcoating anything. He laid it all out, unfiltered, messy, and brutally honest. According to him, the truth was simple. Neil Young was probably the most selfish person I know. And for Crosby, that wasn't anger talking. That was a lifetime of wounds finally being said out loud. To understand how bad it got, you have to go back to the beginning, to a time when the band was young, the world was changing, and CSNY was being built on equal parts brilliance and chaos. In the early 1970s, they were untouchable, the Beatles of American folk rock. Every voice mattered. Every harmony was a piece of architecture. Every personality was a firecracker. David Crosby had the vision. Stephen Stills had the virtuosity. Graham Nash had the sweetness and the soul. And Neil Young had the wild card. Unpredictable, intense, brilliant, and emotionally distant in a way few people could penetrate. Together they were unstoppable.
This is a book about the Byrds. If you loved the Byrds or you're curious about the Byrds, this is a great book.
Separately, they were four different storms crashing into each other. Crosby always admitted he wasn't easy. He had a temper, addictions, ego, stubbornness. He once said openly, "I'm an a-hole." And he wasn't wrong. He clashed with bandmates constantly. He fought everyone at some point. But even with all of that chaos, the feud with Neil Young stood apart. It was deeper, sharper, more personal. And according to Crosby, the real reason was simple. Neil Young only cared about Neil Young. He only thinks about Neil, period. That's the only person he'll consider. Ever. That's not a small accusation. That's decades of anger distilled into one sentence. But Crosby wasn't speaking out of nowhere. The crash point came in 2014. Neil Young left his wife Peggy after nearly 4 decades of marriage and began dating actress Daryl Hannah. The rock world buzzed about it quietly.
I don't get along with her that well anymore, but I do love her with my whole heart.
But David Crosby, he didn't do quiet. He went on national television and called Hannah a purely poisonous predator. A nuclear bomb went off instantly. Neil Young cut him off completely. Publicly, CSNY will never tour again. Ever, Young announced, and he meant it. Crosby later apologized. He said it on Howard Stern. He admitted he shouldn't have said it. He admitted Neil had every right to be furious, but the damage wasn't repairable. It wasn't even close. And behind that one comment, there was a lifetime of friction. Neil has got a genuine beef, Crosby said years later. That's all right. But then slowly he started revealing the full picture, the reasons that went beyond a single insult. Politics? They were never aligned. "I'm a very liberal guy," Crosby said. "Neil doesn't really do politics. He does Neil. Creatively, Neil was brilliant, but he was also a ghost, showing up when he felt like it, disappearing when he didn't, committing only when the wind blew the right direction. The band would plan rehearsals, tours, albums, and Neil would walk in or walk out with zero explanation. It was just Neil. And that personality, that unpredictable, I answer only to myself streak, was something Crosby both admired and deeply despised, because they needed Neil Young. But Neil Young didn't need them. That imbalance poisoned everything. But here's the twist. While Crosby was out here dropping truth bombs in interviews, Neil Young himself kept things quieter. He rarely commented on Crosby until the day Crosby died. Young could have stayed silent. He could have kept the grudge alive. But instead, he wrote something that shocked everyone. David is gone, but his music lives on. He called Crosby the soul of CSNY. He praised his energy, his voice, his talent, his passion. He remembered the early years as golden, wild, musical lightning in a bottle. He described Crosby as a catalyst, the spark that turned 4 musicians into legends. And even though their friendship was shattered, Neil Young chose to remember the music instead of the war. But make no mistake, they were estranged until the end. They never reconciled. They never sat in the same room again. They never found peace. The feud didn't just hurt Crosby and Young. It splintered the whole band. Crosby and Graham Nash, once inseparable, ended up enemies as well. Graham changed from the guy I thought was my best friend to being a guy that is definitely my enemy, Crosby said. I don't see any future there at all. He accused Nash of pretending to take care of him just to keep the money flowing. Nash accused Crosby of betrayal and selfishness. They stopped speaking entirely. Stephen Stills? He was the only one who stayed on speaking terms with Crosby, the only thread linking the broken family together. And Crosby never stopped admiring him. He's the best guitar player, the best singer, and the best writer, Crosby said. I really admire Stephen tremendously, but admiration doesn't fix history. Broken friendships don't heal themselves. CSNY, the supergroup that changed the industry, died not from a lack of music, but from an overdose of humanity. Flawed, emotional, stubborn, brilliant humanity. And behind that collapse, behind the fractures that never healed, Crosby kept aiming one final truth at Neil Young. He's the most self-centered, self-obsessed, selfish person I know. But what made Crosby so blunt in his final years wasn't just bitterness. It was grief, loss, regret, the painful awareness that life doesn't give do-overs. Because while he was fighting bandmates and arguing with reporters, Crosby was also dealing with something far heavier, the death of his son Beckett, at just 21 years old from an opioid overdose. I miss him a lot, Crosby said. It hurts. Believe me, it hurt. Beckett had been raised by Melissa Etheridge and Julie Cypher. Crosby had been their sperm donor, and even though he wasn't their active day-to-day parent, he loved them deeply. He watched Beckett struggle with painkillers after skateboarding accidents. He watched addiction take root, and he watched the thing every parent fears become reality. I love them both, he said of Beckett and his sister Bailey. They visited often. Loss has a way of stripping away ego, of forcing you to tell truths you spent decades swallowing, of making old grudges feel heavier, more final. And so Crosby stopped pretending, stopped smoothing things over, stopped acting like the past didn't cut him. He was raw, open, unfiltered, and honest about everything, including why he would die estranged from two of the most important musical partners of his life. Neil Young defended his wife and never forgave him. Graham Nash felt betrayed and walked away. Stephen Stills stayed, but even that friendship was quieter, softer, changed by age. Crosby knew he wasn't the victim. He owned his mistakes. I was in a hole, he said. I was difficult. I made it worse. But he also knew something else. Some people hurt you not because they're cruel, but because they are built differently, because empathy isn't their first language, because independence comes before all else. And to David Crosby, that was the truth about Neil Young. Brilliant? Yes. A visionary? Absolutely. A legend? Without question. But also, in Crosby's words, selfish beyond belief. Two men who made history together. Two men who created harmonies that felt like heaven. Two men who could never find harmony with each other. Neil Young wrote beautiful memories after Crosby died. Crosby died believing Neil Young never cared about him at all. And somewhere between those two truths lies the real story. Messy, human, painful, and unforgettable. Just like the music they made together.